She's on Wall Street. She ends up in a police car on her way escorted to a psych ward.
July 2005. After being released from the psychiatric hospital, Janet speaks with Dr. Lukoff and Dr. Groff for the first time.
These non-ordinary states that are healing, that are transformative, that are potentially evolutionary, and that also have what we call heuristic value, which is that they can bring absolutely new information about the psyche, about the human nature, about the nature of reality.
Terms like spiritual emergency, spiritual crisis, spiritually transformative experience, extraordinary experiences, exceptional experiences, and so on.
August 2005, Janet reaches out to David Oakes and Celia Brown of Mind Freedom to begin establishing a support network.
So in 2005, I had just gotten my master's, but I was starting to pull away from spirituality in the sense of religion. I was told when I was the assistant to the pastor of this mega church here that I was going to lose all my friends because I'm starting to have these healing abilities. I wasn't aware of what was happening to me. People were starting to stay away from me at that time, and I didn't know how to handle like all the energies that were coming through me.
I kind of see myself and others who have gone through similar experiences as urban shamans, because if you don't know, shamans are people in the tribe that have had altered experiences when they're usually very young.
My husband and I wished to have a child, but I needed to taper off from my psych meds. Depakote was known to cause birth defects, and so I was referred to the Perinatal and Reproductive Psychiatry Clinical Research Program at Harvard's Medical School and Massachusetts General Hospital to discuss my options. Dr. Lee Cohen had conducted the only reliable research at the time on the birth defects linked to psych meds taken by bipolar women during their pregnancy. I was given only two available choices: do not have children, or stay on a medication during the pregnancy proven to produce the least amount of birth defects, which was lithium, the very medication that annihilated my creativity. I ignored them and decided to withdraw slowly from the brain meds under close supervision from a doctor to ensure the best prenatal environment for my baby. The withdrawal from my meds was done too quickly, and after a full work schedule teaching 6 different level English classes and directing a high school musical, I launched into a deep creative mode during that winter break from school, and after a misunderstanding of this creative process, I ended up back in Four Winds Hospital in Katona, New York in 2006. Inside a wakeful dream state lasting 10 days, I'm 1 month pregnant and unable to receive antipsychotics. Jack is born in November, and my hope is that he isn't born with the bipolar gene. I become a stay-at-home mom, completely engrossed in raising my son. I hope I will never have to go into a psychiatric hospital again, and I buy into this bipolar label, convinced these meds are what I need to be well.
January 2006, Janet returns to Bergen Regional Medical Center with her business partner to meet with the CEO and set the record straight on her misdiagnosis. The CEO requests a proposal to train the hospital staff in spiritual emergency. Janet is invited to speak to Congress with the JED Foundation, but it gets canceled. Janet writes to Congressman Patrick Kennedy. Janet and her business partner issue letters to other congressmen and senators, along with a letter to New Jersey Governor Richard Cody. They also visit a law office to determine if this is worthy of a lawsuit.
Often when we think about altered states, people who are labeled with things like schizoaffective and schizophrenia, it's often as Malidoma Patrice, a shaman from South Africa, would refer to this as good news from another realm.
Too have been someone who has been labeled and diagnosed and hospitalized involuntarily against my will.
I tried to introduce a conversation with the psychiatrists, psychologists, and the psych nurses. I offered explanations and alternative frameworks for my mystical and spiritual experiences. However, these were seen solely through the eyes of psychopathology, through the lens of psychopathology. And in that setting, there was no room for my views and my interpretations. I was given a very dehumanizing clinical gaze as I expressed my experiences, and everything was fit into a very narrow and incorrect box.
And so when I came back into the hospital, I received the worst treatment I could have ever received. I was over-medicated. I had chemical restraints. So they poured all sorts of drugs into me. I couldn't tell up or down, night or day. We're not even people in this place. We're getting babysat by problematic television, traumatized by over-medication, and then told harmful things like don't let yourself get raped again. And so I say this, and this isn't even like, there's so many stories like mine. It's not even shocking, even though it really should be, to people like me who've been in hospitals. It's kind of like, what's your hospital war story? Here's mine.
I think when you talk about different perspectives on psychosis, we have three resources of expertise. We have the body of scientific knowledge, we have our practice, and you get better in your practice if you train and train, but we also have the lived experience of persons who went through it. And really that's an as important resource of our expertise.
So please join me, please donate, and hope to see you on the Brooklyn Bridge.
I had a spiritual emergency, and I could not find any help at the time to help me with my spiritual emergency. Like many of my clients, I also felt trepidation about speaking with a helping professional regarding the experiences I had had, which had include visions, had include audio communication, a lot of mystical experiences I had in this acute period of time, and I did not feel safe or comfortable having conversations with a helping professional regarding these experiences.
I would consider it a spiritual emergence in 2011 that turned into a spiritual emergency due to the traumatic contact that I had with the mental health system.
The United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a few provisions that I think are really applicable here. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. No one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Everyone has the right to an effective remedy by the competent national tribunals for acts violating the fundamental rights granted to him by the Constitution or by law. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought. Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression.
In late June and early July 2012, 9 of us filed complaints with the APA Ethics Department. 7 filed because they were harmed by getting a diagnosis, and an 8th filed because a loved one died as a result of being diagnosed. I filed an interested party complaint after decades of calling in vain for any DSM or APA official vigorously to educate the public about the unscientific nature of the manuals and to redress the harm and prevent future harm.
Of a woman who has asked to be called Davina for this video. She is one of the people who filed complaints with the American Psychiatric Association's Ethics Department because of the harm she suffered from being diagnosed with labels from their manual, known as the DSM. All of the complaints were summarily dismissed without consideration of their merits.
And I remember quite well that I was in forced hospitalization and that I was waiting for Wouter Bos to come. And Wouter Bos is a political leader in the Netherlands. And I was really convinced that he would come to get me out of this mental health hospital. It was very tough for me and I didn't communicate with you. And then you came by and you said to me, May, I can really see that you're suffering. And from that moment I really thought, wow, he really is noticing I'm suffering. Yes, I am suffering. And then there was a moment of connection between us. And yeah, that really helped me a lot. Yeah.
You didn't drink well, you didn't sleep well, you didn't eat well. So there were a lot of signs and we wanted to help you. And we didn't know quite well how. It was very difficult, yeah.
So after I published Anatomy of an Epidemic, I began hearing from people who really wanted to sort of talk about what it meant for them. And both from people with lived experience and prescribers, actually. Now, at that time, I already had a personal blog because Mad in America was my first book. And so I had a blog related to that. And so I began just running their blogs on my personal blog. And then it became obvious that really, it would be really helpful to have a website that did several things. Provided a forum for people with lived experience to talk about their experiences. To provide a forum for people just to write about what were their thoughts about how we might change psychiatry. Prescribers, family members, activists, that sort of thing. And then 3, of course, is if you look at Anatomy of an Epidemic, it's really a story about how we as a society have organized ourselves around a false narrative. a false narrative of science. And so one of the key things in terms of reforming psychiatry or rethinking psychiatry is to provide the actual research to the community, to the public, about what is known about drugs, what is known about the validity of diagnoses and that sort of thing. So it became evident that it would be really useful to have a website that provided those three things: a forum for stories of personal experiences, a story for blogs, and research news.
How he has taken all of these years of experience that he's had, and in establishing Mad in America, and all the all the chapters that are now around the world, you know, and I was there. I attended the sessions for Mad in Ireland, and the recent ones, and to see how it's flourishing, how this movement that he started under Mad in America is flourishing in so many other places now, because the truth is coming out, and we're sensing the truth of what he says, and we're sensing but it's not truth in a battle truth. It's a truth in a compassionate way, as you said, and it's the kind of truth that you go, yes, now what?
My name is Nadine Denneth. I'm from the UK, and all my experience in the field of mental health has come from seeing what has happened to two family members of mine who have both been sectioned under the Mental Health Act 1983 for treatment of their bipolar disorder.
After another misunderstanding about my creative process, I'm brought to the hospital again. In the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy, I was having difficulty sleeping. And this was the most hurtful of hospitalizations yet, because it marked the beginning of the end of my marriage. I'm back at Four Winds Hospital and still on Lamictal.
This is from Joel Paris at McGill University in 2012. He says, while in principle, science should be the basis of any diagnostic system, DSM has been seduced by the illusion that advances in neuroscience provide empirical validity for a new system. In reality, we do not know whether conditions like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or obsessive-compulsive disorder are true diseases.
With each passing day, I saw the negation of my freedom as an American, as if I was the perfect example of a person who they should lock up with no trial. This bipolar label they tagged me with decades ago, one of the most acute mental illnesses that is classified in the DSM, was linked up to as many aspects of my life as my social security number. After another forced hospitalization, I start my Not As Crazy As You Think blog to begin to share these coercive experiences with the institution.
Janet takes a 2-week timeout to record her story in 2015.
No one would ever really know that I live with sadness and pain and anxiety. Some might call it depression. Sometimes I do slip into that. But most wouldn't know because I have been this success out there. I really want to talk about my spiritual emergencies starting in 1979. I want to find a way to shine the light on it and feel good about it. Yesterday I just cried tears driving home from work, just tapping into the depth of pain that just can hardly be described. I found myself saying, I didn't do anything wrong. I really didn't do anything wrong. I didn't commit a crime. I got locked up twice, actually 3 times. The first time was just overnight and my dad rescued me. He believed in me.
is al heel fijn als patiënten hun verhaal kwijt kunnen. Ik had er dus ook het gevoel dat er echt op een gegeven moment dat de geesten in mijn lichaam zitten. En dat is ik kan wel vertellen of dat nou waar is of niet. Het voelt in ieder geval heel naar. Maar het is wel heel fijn als je dan in ieder geval daarover kan praten.
I had a very profound experience that completely transformed my life. What happened is I went to bed one night on February the 19th, 2016, fell asleep, had a very, very profound lucid dream. And the next morning when I woke up, I was flooded, when I opened my eyes and I looked around the room, I was flooded with this incredible sense of unity, of oneness, of complete interconnection with the universe, something that I had never had even a glimpse of before in my life. It was a very profound and powerful moment for me. And I was filled with this incredible sense of unconditional love, again, a love that I'd never experienced in my life, despite having been brought up in a very loving family, surrounded by love. It was something completely different.
I was hospitalized 6 times involuntarily against my will. Smacked the label of bipolar 1 on me, which led to all sorts of trauma and pain. And when I was hospitalized, there was very little to no exploration of the spiritual dimensions of my experience. Initially, I was diagnosed with substance-induced psychosis, then schizoaffective, then bipolar 1, then bipolar 2, and then I just stopped paying attention to the labels. I had 6 involuntary psychiatric hospitalizations. My psychiatrist was telling me, "You've got a lifelong incurable disability. Sorry. You may want to lower your expectations about what's possible." My whole experience was completely spiritual. I told my psychiatrist that I believed God would be able to heal me without medication. And my psychiatrist replied, "God invented the medication and empowered scientists' minds to help you." I was in seminary at the time, so I had a ton of spiritual conversations, and I was plugged into a spiritual direction program. I gained enough conceptual frameworks, existential coping skills, and authentic community to allow me to lean on them when I needed them. I also discovered a powerful meaning and purpose that connected me to a world beyond myself. I started working as a peer support specialist and presenter with NAMI in 2016.
My medical records further stated I was exhibiting delusional thoughts with convoluted insight because I kept trying to communicate that I was a director of a play and that a lot of people were counting on me and that my absence would affect them. They recorded this as evidence that I was grandiose. These are all symptoms attached to their tag of bipolar disorder. After this aggressive forced hospitalization, I reached out to Mothers Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, and Mind Freedom International. Mind Freedom International Secretary responds, "As David Oakes said, even if we won a $1 million grant from Amnesty International or some other organization tomorrow and used it to hire and train a half-dozen smart attorneys, we would still not have the resources to deal with the tsunami of psychiatric victims who approach us for legal assistance or sanctuaries for those fleeing from psychiatric harm and involuntary treatment."
I'll be talking about understanding mental issues from a spiritual perspective, Sick or Gifted, the story of recovery, and answering the call or the gift. So I spent many weeks in locked psych units after suicidal attempts. As I mentioned before, in one particular hospital, there was an art therapy program, Tai Chi, and also a visiting monk who led meditation groups. There wasn't an integration taking place with my spiritual and physical bodies. And 2, in order for this divine, fiery, and strong spirit to emerge within me, it had to get rid of some lower level energies within me. This made me look like an absolute disturbed person in the eyes of others. I presented to be disassociated, confused, and also psychotic, so to speak. I refused treatment, and I know my rights. And I told him that he couldn't force, the treatment on me. And he became visibly annoyed, crossed his arms, and said, "I'm giving you an injection." And he argued with me and finally walked away.
And then after that, I wrote up the article, but it was on my site. And then I sent Robert the article about what I wrote up about the seminar that I witnessed. And then at that point, he asked me to write my personal story for Man in America.
Wow.
So it was very like, I have to get my voice out there, That was where I was at 2019. And 2018, I also that was my last time I was hospitalized. It was 2017 going into 2018. So it was almost like a decision.
2005, Kenneth Kindler, he was one of the world's researchers. He says about this whole chemical imbalance story, we have hunted for big, simple neurochemical explanations for psychiatric disorders, and we have not found them. Half a century of research has disproven these hypotheses. We organized ourselves around a narrative that told us that the pathology of schizophrenia, the pathology of the causes of schizophrenia, the causes of depression, and really other disorders were due to chemical imbalances in the brain. And that's a story that tells you need to take your medication, and you need to take it forever, really, because you have to counterbalance this thing. And the tragedy is, it's not true. And your science was supported. You know what they said? Oh yeah, we knew this 25 years ago. But clearly they forgot to tell the public because surveys found in 2005, 2007, even more recently, 80 to 85% of the public now knows that psychiatric disorders are due to chemical imbalances in the brain. So that's the heart of the problem we've had. We organized ourselves around a false narrative. DSM diagnoses are not useful for research because of their lack of validity. In reality, we do not know whether conditions like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or obsessive-compulsive disorder are true diseases. Study as far as bipolar, it is now well recognized that outcomes today are much worse than in the pre-lithium era.
Clearly articulated as a must-do is policy innovation across domains. This isn't a health issue only where we need policy changes in health and mental health. We need policy changes in housing. We need policy changes in economic development. We need policy. These are all supporting policy changes that say people need the opportunity of wellness. And for me, the individuals that he cites in the studies are the canaries in the mine shaft.
It's such a huge betrayal that it's hard, and the cognitive dissonance that would arise from physicians, from the APA.
Janet notices a nudge to get back into research on spiritual emergency and meets Elizabeth Sabat and Dr. Michael Garbe through the American Center for the Integration of Spiritually Transformative Experiences, known as ACISTE, ASSIST.
49% of Americans have reported having a significant spiritual or religious experience that changed their worldview, that changed them. That's a significant number. That's a significant number of people that have never talked about their experiences because they're afraid of being ridiculed or shamed or having the sacredness of their experience taken away from them. Very often, they're very difficult to describe. And when you do try to describe these experiences, you cannot convey the actual experience.
First go around at a doctorate and still trying to integrate these experiences that I had. I wanted my doctorate, the topic of the research, to be on spiritual emergence and spiritual emergency. And when I was bringing in this topic into my research class, I was not met with very welcoming arms, and I was almost in an indirect way, well, actually not even indirect, very direct. I was told, can I not bring in something else to research? And that just goes to show you that the institutions are not very open, or they were not open to this conversation. So I didn't feel like the helping professions could help me. And then clearly the educational institutions were not going to help me do the research. I started doing my practice on my own. And years later, I went back to my second doctorate program. And this time, serendipitously enough, I proposed my research and I was welcomed to do it. And I conducted my research on spiritual emergency, and it was very validating. It was very validating to be allowed to conduct this research. As if we need to be allowed, we have to be given permission to conduct research on spirituality. Because I was not offered the support that I needed, or the welcoming that I needed, I, like many other clients, I started thinking that I was crazy, and that's the problem, right? Because there's no venue of conversation, because this hasn't been normalized, because it isn't okay to talk about this topic. You start thinking there's something wrong with you, and I think that's the problem. Is that myself and many of my clients, because there isn't a welcoming conversation on this topic, you feel isolated, you feel alone, and you feel like you're crazy even without anybody telling you you're crazy.
Dr. Michael Garbe records Janet's story at Rutgers University.
There was nothing to gain in the hospital. There was no therapy. There was no offering, of work. It was really no offering of therapy. There was basically drug people and, get through your time. So anyway, let's say I survived it, got home, and what I got clear on was I needed to write and tell the truth about this. My Wall Street friends were saying they wanted to sue the state of New Jersey because of the mandate for training. And apparently the people that I was working with did not have any training in spiritual emergency because I gave them my research. So when I came out and I said, no, I don't want to sue anybody. I want to educate. I want to publish the book and let people figure out, is she bipolar or not? I want to publish, this is my story. You tell me if I am or not. And then I really want to write a movie script so that there's an entertaining way to understand this from normal business type, everyday people go through this. And that's where I wanted to call it Spy in the House of Crazy, because twice, I had the experience of being called and I said, let's call it a spy, Spy in the House of Crazy.
I was fighting FDIC and it was just too hard for me. And I was contemplating on taking my life. I just couldn't do it. I just didn't want to be here. And I was so depressed that my doctor, who was awesome at the time, she said, you need to be hospitalized. I met this wonderful therapist who challenged me. And she said, well, what's next for you? And she goes, the homework that you have to do this weekend is figure out what you're going to do next. She's like, you're a great coach. I saw your website and you're not doing it anymore. Why don't you think of being a therapist?
In order to involuntarily commit someone, which is a euphemism for psychiatric imprisonment, the state has to prove by clear and convincing evidence that as a result of mental illness, the person is a danger of serious harm to himself or themselves or others, or so disabled that they are unable to survive safely in freedom. And even if so, they have to prove that there's no less restrictive alternative. For forced drugging, the state has to prove that the person is incompetent to decline the medication, which is a farce all in itself, and that the psychiatric drugs are in their best interest, and there's no less intrusive alternative available.
The year I started litigation was in 2019 for the restoration of my firearm rights. I followed this with misfiling in over 20 governmental agencies before filing a civil lawsuit because I really didn't know any better. So, have I gone to court? Yes, I've gone to court. I've gone to court starting in 2019. I'm waiting for a hearing date in the district court to hear the motion for reconsideration, and I'm waiting for SCOTUS to determine if they will hear my state asylum case. So yes, you should not be put in an asylum or a psychiatric ward for a physical injury.
Just recognize how dangerous mental health laws have become, how off the rails the practice of involuntary commitment actually already is, and we gotta, like, even if you're not an abolitionist, even if you're not gonna go that far, recognize we are far, far off of where we need to be as a society in terms of what involuntary commitment should really look like, you know, and I'd say break it down into the two pieces because they're very different. The notion of when you're trying to justify detaining someone, physically controlling them, because that's one thing, and then the notion of intervening in someone's brain with drugs or electroshock or whatever it is.
Are already a priestess, and you need to acknowledge who you are, because your gifts are based on your ancestors. And I was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, I'm from Haiti. I don't know nothing like that, you know, because whenever you say Haitian, the minute you think voodoo, right? And I was like, I don't know nothing about voodoo. Like, I'm not. MetLife agreed and approved. It was 4 cases I did, but I won that first case. Once I won that case, everything else opened up. You know, I mean, we got to be realistic about finances, but when God puts it together, it'll work it all out.
What I didn't know or realize about the world of psychiatry until long after I exited it, really recently, is that there's a kind of silent contract that you sign when you become a patient of psychiatry. I know not everybody's going to believe this, but I know that I ended up in the hospital 3 separate times because of side effects from these meds.
The numbers of people getting forcibly hospitalized and forcibly treated has actually been rising dramatically for decades. In British Columbia, doubling. In Ontario, doubling. In California, 30-day detentions tripled. Child detainees tripled. In Colorado, doubling. Nevada, doubling. Indiana, doubling. Florida, doubling.
Now the case settled out of court, and then less than 1 month later, my dad passed away.
I think I've been able to build a good reputation and a career in psychiatry as part of the system. So maybe the system might listen to me with some of these messages. So I would like you, with all of this work you're doing and your dedication and and what you're trying to do to tell me as the American Psychiatric Association, as if I'm all of the psychiatrists in the country, what is the message you really want us to hear?
For sure. So one is, let's just be a lot more honest here about what's really going on with everybody all the time. Like, talk more honestly about the questionable underpinnings of this as a science, and be more transparent about it as in its finest, perhaps an art, and at its most dangerous, perhaps misinformation and deception and lying and manipulation.
Well, neither of those are the terms that are used in the DSM. The category that is actually in the DSM is called religious or spiritual problem.
So those would be states that, for example, the shaman's experience is part of the initiatory crisis, or states that native cultures experience in rites of passage or some other powerful rituals. The kind of states that the initiates experience in ancient mysteries of death and rebirth in Egypt and in Greece and other places. The experiences that people have in different forms of yoga, in different forms of Buddhism, the Sufis experience, the Christian mystics, the Kabbalists, and so on. And it was just unbelievable to me that we don't have a special name for them. We put everything into that one bag of altered states, and the implication is that they are all pathological. You see, we don't have a category, a spiritual experience, a mystical experience. So anybody who has any kind of episode of non-ordinary states would be seen as mentally ill and would be getting medication and a diagnosis and so on. So when we did a lot of work with these states and we discovered the healing and the transformative potential, we started calling these spontaneous states spiritual emergencies or psychospiritual crises.
So over the past 2 decades, these people with all these spiritual experiences, 4-star meds, what happened to them? And they were stigmatized. Where'd they go?
Well, we have to go back to the 70s, 80s, and 90s to answer that question.